Most people are one bad month away from needing these foods, and most of them don't even know it. During the Great Depression, 15 million Americans lost their jobs almost overnight. Families didn't starve. They figured it out, with bones, with peels, with a tin of meat and a bag of beans. And they fed everyone. 12 foods made that possible. And right now, with grocery bills doing what they're doing, people are quietly going back to every single one of them. Not for nostalgia, because they work. The one at number 1 is probably already sitting in your grocery store, in the aisle you've never paid attention to. Here are all 12. Number 12, Wacky cake. Let's start with something that genuinely sounds like it shouldn't work. A chocolate cake? No eggs, no butter. No milk? Mixed and baked in a single pan. Ready in 30 minutes. By the early 1930s, eggs, butter, and milk weren't just expensive for many families. They were simply gone. And those 3 ingredients were the ones most bakers assumed a cake couldn't exist without. So someone found a way around all 3 at once. The recipe used flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, white vinegar, cooking oil, and water. The chemistry does the work. When baking soda and vinegar meet in a hot oven, they produce a rapid release of carbon dioxide, the same reaction that makes a science fair volcano overflow. And that gas lifts the batter. The oil replaces the fat butter would have brought. The cocoa and sugar carry everything else. The method was designed around one more constraint: no extra dishes. Everything went directly into the baking pan. 3 small holes pressed into the dry ingredients. 1 for vinegar, 1 for oil, 1 for vanilla if there happened to be any. Cold water poured over the top, a gentle stir, and straight into the oven. Think about what that made possible. A mother in 1934, husband out looking for work. Youngest child turning 7 that afternoon. No eggs, no butter, no milk, but she had flour, sugar, a tin of cocoa, vinegar, and a little oil. She made a wacky cake. Her child blew out candles on a real chocolate cake that night. That's the real job this recipe did. It didn't just feed people. It kept ordinary moments alive inside circumstances that kept trying to erase them. Today, the practical case is clear. It stores well soft for several days in a sealed container. No frosting needed. A dusting of powdered sugar or a thin spread of jam is enough. Not the most impressive cake you'll ever make, but it has outlasted nearly every trend-driven recipe of the last century because it delivers every time with ingredients that are almost always within reach. Number 11, stuffed bell peppers. This one looks like it doesn't belong on a list about hard times. A bright bell pepper, top removed, packed with rice, ground meat, and seasoning. Colorful, complete. Even generous looking. That appearance is completely intentional. One of the hardest parts of managing a Depression-era kitchen wasn't just having too little food, it was the visible experience of having too little. Everyone at the table watching the portions get divided. Everyone aware of exactly how small their share was. Stuffed bell peppers didn't just stretch a small amount of protein. They made the stretch invisible. A 1/4 pound of ground beef, mixed with leftover rice and a handful of breadcrumbs, packed into 4 individual peppers and baked. 4 complete-looking portions, 1 per person, no dividing a central dish, no moment where the shortage became obvious. The pepper itself contributed practically, both cooking container and edible component, adding natural sweetness as it roasted in color to plates that might otherwise have been plain. Breadcrumbs absorbed moisture and added volume. A spoonful of canned tomato across the top kept the filling from drying out. One detail that matters: don't pack the filling too tightly. Compressed filling heats unevenly and dries in the center. Left a little loose, steam circulates and the rice stays tender throughout. These also improved overnight. Several made at once could be refrigerated and reheated through the week. Better the second day than the first. The real lesson is about perception. A small amount of food, handled with care, can feel like considerably more than it is. That skill doesn't expire. Number 10. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Some meals don't stick in memory as food. They stick as a feeling. The sound of butter in a hot pan. Bread slowly going golden while cheese softens in the middle. The smell of tomato soup on the back burner filling a cold kitchen. For millions of Americans who grew up after the Depression, this combination carries associations that have nothing to do with what's actually in the bowl. A rainy afternoon, fogged windows. That particular sense of being somewhere warm while whatever was happening outside kept going without you. That feeling wasn't accidental. Grilled cheese and tomato soup became a staple because dollar for dollar, it produced more comfort than almost anything else a family could put on the table. A can of soup, a few slices of bread, a small amount of cheese, dinner. But also a signal that the household was still holding together, that the day still had a proper ending. The ritual was specific. Not sandwich and soup separately. You tore a corner off the hot sandwich, held it in the bowl a moment, let it sit. The crust softened, the cheese blended into the tomato. Two cheap things became something that felt more complete than either was alone. Technique: low, slow heat. Give the cheese time to fully melt before the bread browns. Slightly older bread works better. It holds its structure and doesn't go soft when dipped. Psychological comfort has real practical value during hard times. It affects how people carry themselves, how children experience a household. A simple meal made to feel like a proper one is doing more than keeping people fed. It's maintaining something harder to name and harder to replace. Number 9. Potato soup. In good times, the potato doesn't draw much attention. It's a side dish, a supporting character. That changes when money gets genuinely tight. When protein becomes expensive and the grocery cart fills according to price rather than preference, the potato steps forward. During the Depression, it became the center of the meal for a large portion of the country. And it earned that role through one specific property that almost nothing else in a stripped-back kitchen has. When you simmer potatoes long enough in salted water, the natural starch releases into the liquid. The broth thickens on its own. No cream, no flour, no roux, nothing that costs extra money. The potato thickens its own soup. That single property made it one of the most reliable tools in a tight kitchen. The method: a sliced onion cooked in whatever fat was available, bacon grease, lard, occasionally a knob of butter, 30 to 40 minutes of low simmering until the potatoes began breaking apart on their own. The broth turned cloudy and thick without anything added to it. Whatever was available went in. Celery leaves, a few carrot slices from earlier in the week, a torn piece of stale bread that absorbed broth and added body. Nothing thrown away. A large pot fed 6 people at a cost that, even adjusting for inflation, was genuinely low. Leftovers were often mashed the next day and served as a side dish, the same purchase doing a second job. Potatoes still hold the same economic position they did in 1933. When meat prices climb, shopping carts fill with potatoes first. They don't promise luxury, they promise a hot meal, a full stomach, and a pot that can stretch when it has to. What's the one thing in your kitchen right now that you could actually stretch into a few meals if you had to? Drop it below. Genuinely curious. Number 8. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. This one tends to get underestimated. Too simple. Too familiar. More like a kid's lunch than any kind of serious food strategy. That's exactly the wrong frame. During the Depression, peanut butter had a combination of properties that made it nearly ideal under economic pressure. It stored well at room temperature for weeks. A modest amount delivered meaningful protein and fat, enough to carry someone through a morning of physical work. It needed no cooking, no equipment beyond a knife. And it was inexpensive relative to the energy it actually provided. Paired with fruit jelly, adding sweetness and enough acidity to balance the richness of the peanut, the result was a sandwich that cost almost nothing, required almost nothing, and still satisfied in a way that felt complete. Here's what most people miss when they see this on the list. Reliability is its own form of value. When the budget was unpredictable, when there were days nobody had made it to the store, a jar of peanut butter in the pantry meant lunch was covered, sometimes dinner, occasionally breakfast. It asked almost nothing and came through every time. One technique that passed through families: spread peanut butter on both slices before adding the jelly to the center. It creates a seal on both sides, stopping the jelly from soaking through during the hours between making and eating. Small adjustment, real difference by lunchtime. The memories people carry about this sandwich are almost never about the taste. They're about a lunchbox latch clicking open, a paper napkin folded at the corners, trading half of it with a classmate. A whole generation consistently fed by parents who understood one simple equation: spend very little, provide reliably, protect what matters. That equation still holds. Number 7. Sloppy Joes. There was a kind of math that Depression-era mothers of large families got very skilled at. Not taught in any school. The math of making 1 pound of ground beef feed 8 people instead of 4. Ground beef alone, 1 pound, 4 portions, mixed into a thick tomato-based sauce and extended with rolled oats or breadcrumbs. Same pound. 8 sandwiches. The oats and crumbs didn't thin the meal out. They absorbed the sauce as everything cooked together, took on its flavor, and made the filling thicker and more substantial than the beef alone could have produced. The method: brown the beef with diced onion, add canned tomato or tomato paste thinned with a little water, season, add the oats or crumbs, let it simmer into a single cohesive filling. Here's what made this recipe work as well as it did. The kids didn't know. A house in 1936. 5 children. 1 pound of beef. A mother measuring oats into a skillet with full awareness of what she was doing. The filling went onto soft rolls. Plates went around the table, and the children noticed the sauce and the smell and the softness of the bread. Not the arithmetic that made it possible to feed all 5 of them. When the strategy behind a Depression-era recipe was invisible at the table, it had done its job completely. That was the measure of success. One technique that still works. After the filling finishes cooking, take it off the heat and let it rest 5 to 10 minutes before serving. The oats and crumbs keep absorbing. The result is thicker, less messy, and holds together on the bread better. The logic that fed one family through 1936 scaled up to school cafeterias and community gatherings without losing anything at all. Number 6. Leftover soup. There was a saying that moved through Depression-era kitchens. The waste bin should never eat better than the family. It sounds almost like a joke. It was a genuine operating principle, and it changed how people thought about what food actually is. After dinner, a chicken carcass didn't go in the trash. It went into a container in the coolest part of the house. Carrot peels, celery tops, onion skins, the starchy water left in the pot after boiling potatoes, all held onto. Because tomorrow's buying power was uncertain, and what was already in the house hadn't fully given back its value yet. When enough had accumulated, everything went into a pot with water and simmered for hours. The bones released flavor and natural gelatin into the broth. The potato water added starch. The vegetable scraps gave minerals and depth. A soup that tasted different every week, but always tasted like something. Always warm. And always cost nothing beyond what the family had already spent. Some people called it the soup that never ended, something going in most evenings, something coming out every night. Professional kitchens now call this zero-waste cooking. Chefs at well-regarded restaurants present it as a modern philosophy. For families in the 1930s, it wasn't a philosophy. It was how you stayed fed when throwing anything away simply wasn't possible. The core insight still holds. During any period of economic pressure, the greatest efficiency in a kitchen doesn't come from buying more or from buying cheaper. It comes from using what's already been purchased more completely. A carrot peel has nutritional value. A soup bone has flavor. Potato cooking water has starch. The household that recognizes that gets more meals per dollar than the one that doesn't. Every time. Number 5. Rice and beans. If you asked Depression-era homemakers what single grocery purchase gave them the most reliable return, most would have pointed to a bag of dried beans. Not out of tradition. Out of math. A pound of dried beans costs very little and produces several times its weight once cooked. 1 cup of dried beans expands to close to 3 cups after soaking and simmering. Paired with rice, which brings its own caloric density and stretches every meal further, a single modest purchase provided multiple days of filling protein-rich food for an entire household. That kind of return was rare during the Depression. People recognized it quickly. Preparation took time but almost no skill. Beans soaked overnight into a fresh pot with water, a halved onion, salt, whatever seasoning was available. Simmered slowly while the day's work happened around the house. Tender by early afternoon. Served alongside white rice, a balanced, filling meal. A ham bone added depth when available. Without one, the beans were still worth eating. One technique that makes a consistent difference. Throw out the soaking water and cook with fresh. The soaking liquid contains compounds that cause digestive discomfort, and fresh water produces a cleaner, better flavor. A bay leaf or sliced onion during cooking helps the beans soften evenly. Rice and beans appears across Latin America, the Caribbean, West Africa, South Asia, and across the American South. Not because of shared history, but because of shared logic. It is one of the most efficient meals any kitchen can produce at any point in time. A large pot stretches across the week. It reheats without losing anything. It takes additions well, a fried egg, a little hot sauce, A side of bread. Small input. Consistent, significant output. Number 4. Cornbread and pinto beans. If you stood in a working-class Southern kitchen in the 1930s around 4 in the afternoon, you'd hear a specific sequence before dinner was announced. First, the slow bubble of beans that had been on the stove since morning. Then, the dry sizzle of cornbread batter hitting a preheated cast iron pan. Then, the sharp crack of a knife going through a finished loaf, a crust that had gone fully golden and crisp. That sequence meant dinner was done. Not a roast, not beef, a pot of pinto beans and a pan of fresh cornbread. For working families across the South, that was a complete meal, because each part made the other better. The beans brought protein and a thick, savory broth. The cornbread brought substance and texture. And dipping warm cornbread into bean broth created something far more satisfying than either element alone. The beans, soaked overnight, cooked long and slow with onion and salt, a small piece of cured pork added when possible. The cornbread, cornmeal, water or thin milk, a little fat, occasionally an egg, though the egg wasn't essential. The technique that made the best cornbread. Heat the cast iron pan first, coat it with a thin layer of grease, then pour the batter in. Contact with a hot greased surface creates a bottom crust crisp enough to hold its shape when dipped. A cold pan doesn't produce that. The next morning, leftover cornbread sliced flat and fried in a pan until both sides crisped up. Alongside remaining beans, a second full meal from the same preparation. Nothing wasted. When food costs rise and the question shifts from what to buy toward how to make less go further, meals built on beans and cornmeal come back into focus naturally. They scale easily, and they've proven across generations that simplicity is not the same thing as going without. If this has been useful, a like helps more people find it. Takes 1 second and it actually makes a difference. Number 3. Lentil soup. Most people walk right past lentils at the grocery store. Not colorful, packaging is plain, no marketing behind them. For most of recent history, that's been fine. They sit quietly on a low shelf while more expensive things fill carts. But look at what a pound of lentils actually produces relative to what it costs, and the numbers genuinely catch your attention. 1 pound of dried lentils, among the cheapest items in the entire dried goods aisle, produces enough food to serve a family of 4 generously for close to 2 days when eaten alongside bread or rice. High in plant-based protein and dietary fiber. They don't just fill a stomach temporarily, they provide sustained energy through a full workday. What sets lentils apart from almost every other legume? They don't need soaking. Rinse them, add them to a pot with water, and within 30 to 40 minutes of simmering, they're done. A complete pot of lentil soup from a cold start is ready in under an hour. Faster than dried beans and far more forgiving on days when planning ahead wasn't possible. The base is simple: onion and garlic in a little oil, diced carrot and celery if available, lentils with water or stock, salt, pepper, cumin, a bay leaf. Simmered until fully soft and beginning to break into the broth. One technique that noticeably improves the final result. Add vinegar or lemon juice after the soup finishes, not before. Acid introduced too early slows the cooking process significantly. Added at the very end, it brightens the entire flavor of the pot and brings everything else forward. Lentils don't return to attention during hard economic times because someone decides to market them. They return because people watching their spending carefully eventually look at that plain shelf and actually see what they're looking at. Quiet, unglamorous, efficient in a way that very few foods at any price point can match. Number 2. Water pie. The name alone makes people stop. A pie made from water, no fruit, no custard. No cream, no eggs. Just water, white sugar, a little flour, a small amount of butter or lard, and a pie crust. It sounds like it couldn't possibly produce something worth eating. But water pie was real, served on actual tables throughout the Depression. And understanding why it existed tells you something meaningful about what people were trying to protect. Something that goes beyond just staying fed. In that era, pie wasn't just dessert. It was the conclusion of a meal, a quiet signal that the day had ended properly, that the family had been taken care of. That life still had some shape even when almost everything else felt uncertain. When the pantry was too empty for apples or cream or eggs, some cooks refused to skip the ending. They found a way to still put a pie on the table. Here's how it works. As water, sugar, and flour bake inside the crust, the flour absorbs the liquid. The sugar dissolves and begins to caramelize at the edges. The small amount of fat adds a faint richness throughout. What started as sweetened water with a little flour gradually thickens into something that genuinely resembles a soft, pale custard. The step most people get wrong: patience after it comes out of the oven. Cut it warm and the filling runs. Cool it completely. 2 to 3 full hours and it sets into something firm enough to slice cleanly. Most cooks added a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg across the top before baking, not for nutrition. For the smell, because the kitchen's aroma made the pie feel far more substantial than its ingredient list had any right to suggest. A grandfather in rural Indiana made this pie for his 5 grandchildren on Friday evenings during the worst stretches of the Depression. No apples, no cream. No eggs. Flour, sugar, lard saved from the week's cooking, and tap water. Those grandchildren remembered Friday pie for the rest of their lives. They didn't find out until they were grown what the filling had actually been made of. That's the real measure of this recipe. Not what went into it, what it made people feel at the end of a hard day. Number 1. Spam. Spam didn't become what it became because it tasted better than everything else. It became what it became because it solved a problem that nothing else in that era solved quite as completely. The problem was specific. Families, soldiers, and factory workers in the 1930s and 1940s needed protein that was affordable, required no refrigeration, could be stored for years without spoiling, and could be prepared quickly with minimal equipment. Fresh meat failed most of those requirements. Spam met all of them simultaneously. Introduced in 1937 by Hormel Foods, Spam is made primarily from pork shoulder and ham with water, salt, modified potato starch, and sodium nitrite. A sealed can needs no refrigeration. Shelf life measured in years, not weeks. Enough protein and fat to function as a real calorie source. Ready in a pan in under 5 minutes. During World War II, the US military purchased hundreds of millions of cans and distributed them across multiple theaters. General Eisenhower reportedly acknowledged that supplying Allied forces without Spam would have been considerably harder. On the home front, as rationing cut access to fresh meat, Spam filled the same gap in civilian kitchens at exactly the same time. The versatility of a single can went further than most people account for. A thick slice fried until the edges caramelize. Breakfast alongside eggs. Same can, sliced thin with mustard between bread. Lunch. Remaining portion diced into rice with onion and whatever vegetables were on hand. Dinner. 1 can. 3 separate meals. A mother in 1943. 2 children. Her husband working long shifts at a defense plant. The butcher's weekly ration runs out on Wednesday. 2 cans of Spam in the cabinet. Fried Thursday morning. Sliced cold for the children's lunch. Stretched into a rice skillet that evening. 3 full meals, 2 cans, a bag of rice. The family made it to the next shopping day without going without. Today, a can of Spam sits on grocery shelves beside options that cost 4 or 5 times as much. Some people walk past it without a second look. Some consider it a relic. Something for emergency kits, not real kitchens. People who have lived through genuine scarcity see it differently. Immediately. A food that lasts for years on a shelf, provides adequate calories and protein, takes under 5 minutes to prepare, pairs with almost anything else available. It is certainty in a can. And during the kind of situation where tomorrow's buying power is genuinely uncertain, certainty is often worth more than flavor. That's why this earns the number 1 spot. Not because it's the most nutritious item here, not because it's the most emotionally meaningful, because it represents the clearest expression of how people in that era actually thought about food. Figure out what will reliably get your family through tomorrow, and make sure it's already there before you need it. None of these 12 foods were created to become part of history. They were made for a Tuesday, for a kitchen that was nearly empty, for parents who had to feed their families with whatever was actually there. A bag of lentils, dried beans, a few cans of soup, some cornmeal, a jar of peanut butter, a tin of Spam. None of those were exciting purchases, but together, they kept an entire generation fed through some of the most economically difficult years in modern American history. The lesson that comes out of all 12 isn't about expecting the worst. It's simpler than that. The gap between what it actually costs to eat well and what most people assume it costs is wider than almost anyone realizes. A kitchen built around a few reliable, inexpensive staples, beans, grains, potatoes, a handful of well-chosen canned goods, is more resilient than one built entirely around expensive proteins and specialty items. The families who cooked these meals weren't failing at food. They were succeeding at something genuinely difficult, with real skill under real pressure. The ones who understood that a carrot peel or a soup bone or a tin of Spam had value, rather than something to discard without thinking, got more out of every dollar than the ones who didn't. That understanding doesn't go out of date. Which one surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. Genuinely want to know what people weren't expecting to see on this list.